That evening, bitter winds swept through the empty grasslands, shaking the wooden shutters of an isolated homestead as if ghosts were knocking. Within those walls, flames flickered weakly, while darkness stretched across the timber beams. A weathered cattleman slouched over his wooden table, staring at whiskey he hadn't yet tasted. Life had hollowed him out, his wife claimed by sickness long ago. His boy lost to distant battlefields, and this unforgiving earth demanding more from him than it could ever return. He'd convinced himself that nothing in this world could catch him off guard anymore. That belief shattered the moment she appeared. The stranger looked devastated. Her complexion drained from starvation and exposure. Her leather footwear had disintegrated, leaving her feet battered and bleeding. Matted hair framed a face with parched split lips, yet her gaze those haunted. Desperate eyes held an intensity that suffering hadn't managed to extinguish. She seemed utterly misplaced here. Not in this desolate wilderness, certainly not in his dwelling. Still, here she stood, quivering as though her very skeleton might splinter apart at any second, near the warmth of the hearth. She hugged herself protectively. Then, with trembling fingers, she allowed the worn fabric covering her to fall away from her body. It dropped soundlessly to the ground, and her cracking voice pierced the stillness. "I removed it, please." Her frame told stories written in suffering lengthy marks striped across her spine, discolored patches that hadn't faded, scorched areas still angry and red. This wasn't seduction. This was capitulation. The final desperate gambit of someone with nothing left to lose. The cattleman went rigid. Air caught in his lungs like a stone. His hands balled into fists so tight the joints blanched. He'd confronted armed thieves ready for violence. He'd locked eyes with killers. But nothing had ever struck him quite like this broken figure before him now. What he witnessed wasn't disgrace or impurity, but torture inflicted by cruel hands, a brutality so visceral it made his stomach churn. For what felt like an eternity, remained motionless. His gaze hardened, his teeth ground together, and firelight danced across his lined features. He could sense her terror. She anticipated him being just one more predator in an endless succession who would consume whatever remained of her humanity. And that assumption ignited something volcanic inside him. It burned away even the alcohol's numbness. At last he pushed himself upright. His chair scraped harshly against the planks as he rose to his full height, his silhouette looming over her shaking body. She recoiled instinctively, preparing for violence. But he pivoted, grabbed the heavy woolen covering from his sleeping area, and draped it gently around her exposed shoulders. His calloused hands moved with unexpected tenderness, as though handling something precious and breakable. "Not in this way," he said, his tone a deep rumble carrying both authority and kindness. "Never in this way." Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed into the seat he'd abandoned, gripping the wool as if it were her only connection to existence itself. A wrenching sob erupted from somewhere deep inside her, raw and broken, the kind of sound that escapes only when someone has endured far beyond their limits. The cattleman loomed above, chest rising and falling heavily, his expression darkened. It felt as though these four walls had just borne witness to an unspoken oath. Then, like a sudden tempest unleashed, he spun toward the entrance, his footsteps thundering across the floor as he yanked his weathered firearm from its mount. The metallic click of the weapon being readied echoed through the space. He looked back at her, his gaze blazing with unexpected ferocity. "Give me their names," he commanded, his words cutting like a blade. "Tell me who inflicted this, and I'll guarantee they never harm another living soul." The woman's head shook as tears clouded her vision. "You're not understanding," she breathed. "It wasn't just a single person. It's everyone." Her statement settled between them with crushing weight. The cattleman's knuckles whitened around the weapon. If her words held truth, and his real battle was only beginning, her account emerged in broken fragments and labored, breathing pieces of a merciless chronicle. She described a wagon convoy that had turned disastrous. Men who'd transformed from merchants into hunters when civilization's grip loosened and liquor flowed freely. She recounted being captured after dark, transferred between different encampments, encountering people whose smiles dripped with malice and whose touch had never. Learn gentleness. The cattleman absorbed every word like rocks. Dropped into a void he'd thought himself too aged to possess. His weapon remained at his side, lowered but ready. A new resolve had settled over him one. That had nothing to do with marksmanship and everything to do with commitment. When she identified a locationer ramshackle livestock pen 2 valleys. Distant recognition drained the color from his face, and a slow, simmering rage seeped into his marrow. Someone should have been told, he finally said. Not as accusation, but as a grasp for moral order. She met his gaze then, and momentarily a younger, more innocent version of herself flickered behind the damaged woman before him, fear, humiliation, the conviction that nobody cared to hear such horrors. I attempted to, she whispered hoarsely. They mocked me. They claimed a woman in my position, possessing nothing and worth even less, was inviting disaster. I discovered that silence was safer. Her fingers twisted the fabric, knuckles bone white. They made threats of worse consequences. They insisted that if I raised my voice, nobody would listen. The cattleman felt revulsion rise as he contemplated how collective cowardice operated, how men could conceal their crimes behind numerical advantage. His planning proceeded methodically, not from hesitation, but from understanding what his actions would cost. Vengeance driven by blind fury created messy outcomes. He sought a method to stop them that wouldn't leave more innocent casualties behind. He considered the pen she'd mentioned, how those traitors operated, the men who drank beneath a certain tree's shade. He listened carefully as she detailed facial features, vocal patterns, where sunlight struck a particular corner of the structure. Small details that meant the difference between shooting blindly and striking where. Truth existed, darkness would serve them best, he concluded. Swiftness and shadow might prove more effective than a frontal assault. When he outlined his strategy, his voice carried an eerie calmness, like someone narrating a bedtime story with hidden fangs. He wouldn't gather supporters. This wasn't something for public display. He'd ride solo, survey the area, learn the guards' patterns, then select the moment when the moon offered minimal light, free any imprisoned women, and deliver swift justice to those arrogant men in one decisive strike. The woman's eyes widened with something resembling hope so delicate he wanted to shield it from. Harm you mustn't, she protested weakly. They'll hunt you down. They'll destroy everything you have left. He gave a slight shrug, gesture worn with exhaustion rather than courage, more acceptance that righteousness demanded payment, should they come. They'll encounter someone who honored his promise, he stated. They'll also discover stables without horses and a few hounds that'll cause complications. He attempted a weathered smile that barely lifted the heaviness between them. Wake before sunrise and maintain the fire. If I don't return, escape. Don't linger hoping for compassion. Just flee. The woman's laugh emerged dry but genuine, sound like wind through loose boards. You believe I'd abandon you? She whispered. He shook his head firmly. I believe I'd leave you with an opportunity. His certainty made her see him differently, no longer merely as a rescuer, but as someone who'd shoulder others' dangers as his own responsibility as twilight approached. He prepared quietly, inspecting his firearm. Extra ammunition, tucked in a worn pouch, coiled rope to flints. The moon climbed thin and pale. The cattleman's outline moved like a phantom across the plains. He hesitated at the threshold, hand on the door latch, and briefly his eyes found hers. Keep this in mind, he said. Should you need to flee, follow the creek path. It's lower ground, and the hounds can't track as easily. Most importantly, survive. The journey took longer than anticipated, Schmeil exposing more about this territory and the men who profited on civilization's fringe. He avoided the main route, staying within dry ravines in the deep shadows of brush. Eventually, the dilapidated livestock pen emerged in the distance, a place of tilting fence posts and the stale odor of feed mixed with aged beer. Lanterns swayed like captured fireflies. He observed the men three gathered near fencing. Two inside, laughing too boisterously, one half asleep propped against his saddle. The cattleman memorized their positions mentally, tallying them. Noting the patterns of tobacco breaks and amusement, he waited until the men had settled into their stupor. When he slipped behind the fencing, night consumed him like a second layer of skin. He crept along the stable shadows, weapon lowered, breathing controlled. The first chained entrance he discovered opened beneath his touch with barely a whisper of resistance. A slight vibration ran through the boards. He moved with practiced efficiencies, certain and pitiless, toward his own fear. Within the darkness, murmurs stirred, huddled forms, an atmosphere of perspiration and stale despair. He severed a rope silently, felt a small hand grasp his on the weight of a life so slight he nearly broke. A whispered gratitude brushed his face in an unfamiliar language. But the warmth transcended words. They departed the enclosure like phantoms, two shadows pressed against his torso. The men began stirring then, the rasp of furniture, the scrape of a boot. It turned ugly immediately. The sound of men realizing their accounting had been disrupted. A gunshot split the night. A shout rose, and the cattleman cursed under his breath. He sprinted, following the route he'd memorized, every muscle ablaze. Bullets whistled past, one striking the post where he'd rested his palm earlier. He felt searing pain but continued forward. Agony was proof he still lived at the homestead. The woman stood vigil by the entrance, ears catching the first sharp sounds carried on wind, heart clenched like a fist. The hounds grew restless, then quieted, and dust clouds rose beyond the horizon like either promise or warning. The cattleman burst through with both girls. Gasping heavily, garments shredded, eyes alight with the intensity of someone who'd pushed beyond his perceived limits. She clung to him as if to solid rock in rushing water. Trembling, vitality returning through ragged, grateful sobs. He dropped to his knees, palm pressed against the injury, bleeding warm at his side. And for the first time since shouldering his weapon, he permitted himself to feel the full magnitude of his actions.